Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining our immigration information session. We're very happy that you're able to join us. We know that this is an issue and a topic that is very important and near and dear to all of us, and is one that that people are talking about everywhere. And so we wanted to convene all of you together tonight to talk about what's happening and what we can do about it. So we really appreciate you attending tonight and want to say that there's a lot of opportunity for us to make a difference and to really push for solutions. And so I want to introduce our speakers tonight and our panelists tonight. So first, I'd like to start with the president of Americans for Prosperity, Tim Phillips, who's with us tonight. We appreciate him joining us. And we also want to introduce the president of the LIBRE initiative, Daniel Garza. We thank him for being here with us. And then also our senior vice president of policy, which is Jorge Lima for Americans for Prosperity. And I just want to remind you of a couple things. We have a website that we are going to have all this information, a lot of really good information about what we're talking about tonight. There's going to be a lot of blogs and different things added onto there. So if you would, throughout the night, we're going to be posting that website through there. We'd really appreciate it if you join us and taking a look at it. And without further ado, I'd like to open it up for the conversation. If you have a question, please put that into the Q&A and we will try to get to them as time permits. Thank you so much. Jorge, I'll open it up to you, sir.
Thank you, David, and good evening, everybody. It is always a pleasure to jump on the Zoom or any other mechanism. Wish it could be in person, but I'll take this for now. Always a pleasure to be with our AFP and LIBRE activists and teams just across the country. Always, it's energizing to be here with you all, and I just wanted to make sure I shared that with you as I hunker down here in the very swamp of Washington, D.C. It's been a little bit nice for the past couple of days because there's been snow, if you kind of like that thing, but for my Floridian blood, I'm ready for the sun to come back here into our capital city. But I'll go straight into what David started to kick off, which was to frame the conversation of what the DC discussion is right now on immigration reform. And as many of you, I'm sure, saw, the new administration, President Biden, stepped out on day one with a very broad proposal on immigration reform, talking about different components of reform, which include changes to the visa system, addressing the undocumented population, and even including the area of security and the need to address and talk about our border and the security enforcement components of immigration reform. From our standpoint, we think that was a great starter. It was great that the president wants from day one to signal the importance of this issue and his willingness to work with individuals, regardless of what side of the aisle. I think it was great that he put all of these different buckets out there for discussion. That allows for different members to engage in the best way or the most comfortable way that they deem fit. And so that was great to start with. Now, what changes, though, is that doesn't necessarily dictate success. And as you guys have learned to appreciate from AFP and LIBRE, we are focused on actually getting things done. We want to make sure we're not just talking about issues, but if we're going to ask you for your involvement and your voice, it's because we want to see results. And so when we look at immigration reform, we've been talking day and night to elected officials, to their staff, to try to get a sense of where this may be going. And what we're starting to hear is that there continues to be a lot of support to do something, but maybe not everything all at once. And so we're trying to figure out and talking to staff and elected officials on exactly what that looks like. And we keep going back to this issue of dreamers. And we're hearing from members themselves that there's a strong desire to get that done, to fix this. If many of you have been on this fight for a long time, can remember the first DREAM Act was actually introduced in 2001. It's been 2 decades that Congress has been dealing with this issue of the dreamers. And I am, for one, very excited that we're hearing again from both sides that this is an area of focus that they want to see something done. We're hearing from Republicans that they are ready, that it's time to address the plight of the dreamers. And at the same time, we're hearing from Democrats that they're willing to take pieces of what Biden has proposed and see how we can move those forward. Now, you guys know Congress is a tricky place, and exactly what that package looks like is going to be something we figure out as we go along here. But we're hyper-focused on making sure that we get commitment from our elected officials, from our leaders, that they want to focus on the areas of common ground and focus on the things that can get done, rather than continue with the rhetoric and the divisiveness that we've seen for far too long in Washington. So that's exactly where AFP and LIBRE are hyper-focused. We are working with coalition groups and with folks under the dome to really figure out where it is that this common ground can be established so that we move that forward. At the end of the day, there remains the opportunity that perhaps Democrats can find ways to do this as on a pure policy partisan vote. But we think that's going to be very difficult. You're going to need to find bipartisan support to actually get this done. Today, if they wanted it, they needed 60 votes in the Senate. And that means they're going to have to work with Republicans to get something done. And we believe we're very well positioned to help both the Democrats and Republicans find that space to get something done. So that's what we're hearing in Washington. We are excited. We know that there's a lot going on right now, everything from the economic recovery discussions to healthcare and to a whole host of other issues. But we're happy that immigration has its place. We've seen it been prioritized since day one, and we're going to drive it till we get a solution. And so you're going to hear from our experts that have been across the country talking with all of you about what that's going to look like from a grassroots perspective. And then I know David's going to wrap it up at the very end with even some specifics tonight of how you all can get engaged. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Tim to kick us off a little bit of that grassroots conversation.
Thank you, Jorge, and good evening, everyone. I'm Tim Phillips, with President of Americans for Prosperity. And almost 2 years ago, I remember my friend and colleague, Daniel Garza, who heads up LIBRE. You'll hear from Daniel in just a moment. We launched a cross-country series of town halls and community forums that literally stretched, Daniel, from New York to Arizona, from Nevada to Orlando and Miami, and really everywhere in between. And we sought out folks, people from literally every walk of life. I remember being in New York with Dreamers and talking to them and hearing their experiences. I remember being, Daniel, in your hometown of McAllen, Texas, on the border, in a room, and we had local mayors from both parties, Republican and Democrat. We had Latino advocacy organizations. We had Republican and conservative leaders and activists, and we had elected officials from state legislatures. We bring people together, and I remember some of the conversations were not easy. But truthfully, this is not an easy issue. It's complex. You heard from Jorge just now. There are many moving parts to it. But I can tell you the one thing that we heard over and over and over. We heard people asking their leaders to stop the demonization, to stop the political posturing, and actually work to get things done, to move people's lives forward, to give them certainty, and also to make our nation stronger and more prosperous. We heard that over and over. And it's a lesson, I believe, that too many senators and members of the House of Representatives have not yet taken to heart. So tonight, we come in a spirit that we come in DC and across this country. So let's work together. Let's get this done, finally. Jorge mentioned the first Dreamers Act was launched in 2001. That's too long. It's 2 decades ago. It's time to move. And we do believe that in an issue this big, this complex, it makes more sense to break it up, to take the parts where there is broad agreement, like with Dreamers, like with security, and figure out a way to get those done perhaps first. But let's move forward. That's the one thing I've heard over and over. And I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing on Capitol Hill. Just 2 days ago, I had breakfast with a senator, a leading senator, and he told me it's time. He specifically mentioned the Dreamer situation, that there probably are 85 votes in the Senate to move on that. Think about that, 85 votes to move on something like that. with a Dreamer solution, moving this country forward. I spoke by phone to 2 House members this week, and they were telling me that when they talk to their colleagues away from the glare of TV cameras and everything, there is a spirit to get this thing done. And so we're saying it's been too long, that there's too much at stake. Too many people's lives are in flux. They're up in the air. It's time. And so at Americans for Prosperity, we're going to continue urging action. Let's do it in a spirit of reconciliation, of bringing people together, but let's not shy away from some of the tough issues, some of the thorny issues, but let's get away from the political polarization, the name calling, the partisanship where people are too often trying to gain leverage, and let's actually get it done. So with that, I'll turn it over to my friend and colleague who heads up LIBRE, Daniel Garza. Daniel?
Thank you, Tim. I'm already encouraged and motivated knowing that I work with talented and skilled advocates like Jorge Lima and Tim Phillips and David Velasquez, and that we work in teamwork, with just equally skilled and talented folks across the country who make up our community. We have something special, and to leverage that, I think gives us a lot of value. Tim and Jorge are absolutely right. Our immigration system, and you guys know this, should work to harness the entrepreneurial and industrious spirit of people who are motivated to contribute, to work hard in America, and honestly, of course, to keep those out who would exploit America, who would do us harm. We don't have a system of laws right now that allows for that kind of flexibility and accommodation, and then of course that kind of stopping power. And we need reform. And look, Tim was talking about how long we've been doing this and how we went across the country. I go way back to my years in the Bush administration in 2001 when we were trying to do this, working with Senators Ted Kennedy and John McCain from both sides, and that's how long we've been doing this. So I know a lot of folks are saying, Daniel, we've seen this movie before and we know how it ends. Look, I sense some urgency in this current administration, and I hope that obviously the GOP will also be working in good faith. As Tim was talking about, some of the conversations that he's been having already. One of the things that is going to be necessary is going to be bipartisanship, and that spirit of bipartisanship. And look, when you join that with what we can bring to the table, I mean, we advocate, we mobilize, we partner. That's what we do. Our work is to drive good policy, and then of course to stop bad policy. And one of the things, and I know Tim has probably felt this, part of the responsibility that I have always felt, being one of the most influential and largest pro-freedom Latino organizations in the country, is to do effective advocacy and how to do it the right way. Because we need to model how we do that kind of advocacy. And I think that this important issue welcomes, that kind of modeling, where we can showcase, what we bring to the table, because this is not only important to us. Obviously, there's a lot of folks depending on this reform. The individuals, the families, the employers, educators, folks in the agricultural, dairy, service sector, and the poultry sector. There's just so much, and so many folks that this entails, that this impacts. And look, I talked about the urgency that this administration is already feeling. I just read an article where over 170 left of center organizations are putting pressure on the Biden administration that he's not going far enough, that he's not doing enough. So I think that pressure is going to build. So this tells me that they're going to need to cave on their wants in order to gain legislative approval. What that means is, if we invite both sides to come together, this side is going to give and this side is going to give, and hopefully they can arrive at consensus. And if we can be that bridge, if we can bring those policy coalitions together, those organizations that can hold our elected leadership accountable, but also encourage them. I think that's where we can make a difference. When we do our kind of work across the country in communities, rallying our folks, mobilizing our folks, we can send a clear message to Congress that, they have to get this done. So like Jorge was saying, we are well positioned. Democrats, President Biden, left of center organizations, they can't act unilaterally. And we know that the GOP cannot act unilaterally. We've seen that. So by building these policy coalitions, by leveraging the strength that we have and flexing our muscle, and doing this truly bipartisan, we can invite dialogue and work through the differences to arrive at a consensus.
Yeah, and Daniel, those of you watching in the chat feature, you will see a website that we will be putting up. You can go there and take action to join this effort or to talk to your elected leaders. And I'll tell you the message that we would urge you to deliver to your elected leaders in the House of Representatives, your member, and your 2 senators. And that message is, it's time to get something done, to actually move forward on an issue that's been delayed now for decades. Stop the political posturing and the demagoguing and get something done. And as Daniel Garza just pointed out, neither party can do it alone. It's going to take Republicans and Democrats in the Congress working together in some capacity to actually get this done. I think that's a message to send. And when I look at the last 2 years, there were moments, Daniel and Jorge, where it felt like we were so close on a limited agreement with a certainty for dreamers and some border issues. And then just as we were ready to go to fruition with that, one party or the other, or one political leader or the other would pull back, and they would suddenly kind of start firing these rhetorical salvos. And at different times, in all candor, it was both parties that did it, both leaders in both parties that would do that. But I really do believe, with the 2020 election over, with Congress divided so closely, the closest it's been in, frankly, a generation in the House and the Senate between the 2 parties, I think given that result, I really believe this is a moment when we can get this done. So if you want to take action, I would urge you to do so. Go to that website. I know we're going to do some questions now. I think, David, turning it back to you, or Daniel, anything else from your end before we go to questions?
Sure, David.
Yeah, I believe Jorge wanted to answer a couple questions first.
I wanted to appreciate that, David. I wanted to add to what Tim and Daniel were saying, because I want to talk a little bit about the difference that makes here in Washington if we get the voices and the message that Tim and Daniel just shared with you all out, the difference it could make. You all know, you've seen through fights like this one on immigration for the past 20 years, or any of the other issues that we work on, there are groups that don't want anything to happen. And so when we hear, as Tim said, we hear from elected officials that they want to get something done, and that's where they feel the momentum. But then they immediately, whenever they even step out 1 foot out and with that message, they immediately hear from 2 extremes. You can't do anything on immigration, right? So they hear loud from that don't do anything crowd, or they hear from the other crowd that says, you can't just do one piece, you have to do everything. And that leaves the elected officials stuck with nowhere to go. And that is what's led to the heartbreak for the last 20 years. I've seen a lot of folks talk in the chat, man, this is so hard. How are we going to get folks past the partisanship? We know it's hard. We're not going to pretend that this is by far an easy issue to get done, even if we did one piece. But that is when we know that your voices paired with our grassroots infrastructure is when we can echo that voice to drown out what they're hearing from those extremes, to actually give these elected officials the support, come alongside them so that they see that there are people who want them to take the right approach here, which is to start getting something done. And to that point, it's not that we're satisfied with just one piece. We're not, right? LIBRE and AFP have said time and time again, we want to fix the whole system because the whole system is failing everybody right now, right? Whether you look at security on the border, whether you look at the way our visas are implemented and going through the legal process, or you look at the individuals who are living in the shadows, none of that is working. And we know that all of those pieces need to be fixed. But rather than sit here and tell you that we're going to fix everything in one step, which has done nothing for 20 years, we think our approach of starting with something where we know we can get it done is the best way forward, because that success is going to beget more success. And that's how we're going to build momentum to hit all of these pieces. We're in it for the long haul. Don't get that confused. Even though we're talking about starting with one piece of it now, it's because that's how we see us getting to the bigger pie. And so that's why I think it's just so critical. And I know it's hard. We're not telling you it's easy, but that's when we can make the biggest difference, because we're hearing from you, we're hearing from the American public, we're hearing from elected officials that they want to get this done, but then suddenly the reality steps in to stop them. We have to break through that.
Very good, Jorge, and Daniel and Tim. And it's true. We have to have some reform, and the way that we do it is by getting people together to do that. And so a good way to do that right now, and we talked about the Q&A. We have a few questions that have been asked. You guys have been answering the poll questions, which is awesome. But I wanted to ask you a couple questions. Christian is asking, what are LIBRE's line in the sand principles or policy positions that LIBRE sees as non-negotiable when it comes to immigration?
You know, what's interesting, and Jorge can attest to this, you know, we actually have a very wide latitude on what we're willing to start the negotiations with. I mean, look, the president is going to propose legislation, and we think, like Jorge has already said, this is a good starting point. But there are issues where, look, when President Trump proposed those 4 pillars, we had issues with one of the big time with one of the pillars, and the other 3 we could negotiate. And one of the pillars would actually draw down legal immigration after certain years, and that is something that we were not willing to accept, because what that does is actually going to stifle future flows of immigration and then induce more illegal immigration. And that's not the position we want to be in, right? Like I said, we want a flexible, accommodating system. And entre parentheses, let me also say, it's important that we fight to preserve our freedoms and our free market that accommodates for those future flows of immigrants so that they can achieve, wealth and wealth for other Americans. That's critical. But look, what's important here is that propose. Let's hear what you have, from both sides. And there has to be a willingness from the Republicans and the Democrats to listen to each other, to begin to understand each other. Of course, there's going to be lines in the sand, for both sides. But it is remarkable that, like us, how wide that latitude is. But sometimes we just don't bother to listen to each other.
Very good. We just got another question I thought was really good. Jorge, maybe you can give some light to this, but or Tim as well, and Daniel. But it's from Angelina. Would the solution to fix the immigration issue be one big piece of legislation, or going step by step?
I'm happy to jump in on that, and then Tim, please feel free to add more color. But Angelina, I think right now it looks like the piece by piece is the strategy that's going to get us there. That's not to say that somehow these things can gain momentum and suddenly you can add more. But right now the conversation has to get away from all or nothing, because that is not engaging the parties in the way that we need them to be engaged. So we're trying to find those areas that are the obvious come together areas that we can move forward with both folks, so that suddenly they start to build the muscle memory to get more done. Right now, it's been 20 years since the Congress has done anything on immigration, and you talk to anyone, they'll tell you it's impossible. That's literally what they say. Even I want to do it, but it's impossible. We've got to break through that, and you break through that by finding the pieces that can get us started, so that we build momentum to keep tackling more and more pieces. So there was another question I think that was asked about, is there another movement that we could learn from to lean into here? And so related to Angelina's question is this one as well, because we are learning from criminal justice reform. Another issue where it was deadlocked and nobody wanted to give the other side an inch And it took outside groups coming together from across the aisle and saying, we are ready to get something done. We don't have to agree on everything, but we're going to agree on this. And let's move this. And that led to a once in a generation reform, which was the First Step Act, right? At a time when nobody thought the country could come together on something like that. You had incredibly high vote numbers in the Senate, when, to be honest with you, we were hearing even up to that same morning of that vote that this was impossible and it would fail. And then we had more than 80 votes in the Senate to pass something like that. That is how you make this change. And we're modeling a lot of our work after that criminal justice effort.
No, very good. And I think that that also just understanding, and that's a very important piece, that a big immigration reform is very difficult to agree upon, right? And going by step and taking those big issues and making them smaller issues, right? And taking on those is a good strategy, right? And so,
yeah, David, if I could also add to that, because I want to stress what you're saying based on what Jorge had also said. We're not being Pollyannish here. I mean, we're not trying to hoodwink you. We know this is a challenge. We realize this is an uphill battle, but we are going to be true to who we are, on our principles, on the things that we believe makes America stronger and allows people to thrive and brings people out of the shadows where they are full contributing members to society, because that's good for America and Americans. And so, believe me, we have absolutely every notion that you're sensing right now, that you want to express, that this is going to be tough. But I think like it's been said already, if we don't get involved, I don't think there's going to be much that's going to be accomplished. I honestly feel that we can actually make a difference, and that we can bring both sides together. And like Jorge was saying, we saw that under criminal justice reform and the amazing work that Mark Holden and a lot of folks in our community did. We can do that again. We just need the right messaging. We need you guys to be motivated and to leverage your skills and talents in the advocacy work that you do.
One other thing I'll mention, along with criminal justice reform, for the last decade or more, the issue of healthcare has been a very tough, often divisive issue with a lot of rhetoric that's kind of way out there on every side. But there was a piece of legislation that we had worked on for a long time called the right to try. And it was simple legislation. Right to try just said, if you're terminally ill, if you're going to die and you've exhausted other means of trying to save your life, then you can try experimental drugs or therapies that are not yet tested and approved by the Food and Drug Administration and other federal and state agencies. I know that sounds like a common sense idea, but it had been around for years. And because the rhetoric was so tough and the issue was so big and the lines were drawn so harshly between the parties, that idea could not even get a vote in the Congress. We worked on that issue. We talked to Republicans, we talked to Democrats. There were folks in both parties who were quietly for it. But it took a long time. It took critical mass. We got grassroots people involved in this for something as basic as what I just described, right to try. Once we actually brought people into rooms together, members of the House and Senate, we actually got movement on it. And eventually the House or the Senate passed this legislation by a voice vote. That is how, once you got beyond the rhetoric and the posturing, it passed by a voice vote. And in the House, it passed with well over 300, I think it was over 350 votes in the end. And today we have a reform that was badly needed in place on an issue that for years had had no real bipartisan workmanship, or really nonpartisan workmanship on it. And it, I think, led to a lot of the healthcare responses we've seen to this pandemic with regard to vaccines, with regard to telemedicine, that has helped save some people's lives and made vaccines more possible. But it all began with that one issue when folks thought it couldn't be done, right to try. I think immigration is similar. We need to find an area that we can actually show movement, show progress on, get some votes, get a win, and then I think it opens up a bigger opportunity on this issue of immigration.
Very good. And I guess there's a good question there's about 3 questions that are similar. So I wanna ask this one, but I know that we have just everybody that's listening to the conversation, we have a website up right now at blibre.org, and on that website we answer a lot of the questions. Our policy agenda is on there. You can read more details to it, but there's a really good question that I want to make sure that you all get to answer, and I think from there we'll move on and we'll close out. But what would be a good proposal to start making progress on both sides of the aisle that they could agree on? That's from Marlon. But then also there's another question as to what Libre's goal for 2021 and how do we plan on achieving it? I can answer part of that at the end, Jorge. So if you want to take some of that on, go for it, sir.
So I think that's a great question. And to be honest, that's the question I'm hearing from Hill offices, from coalition members. And it's one that drives us in our conversations day in, day out, because it's right now taking form. What does that first piece look like? We know it's going to be anchored on dreamers, right? I don't think there's any doubt from any of the folks that we've been connecting with that it starts with dreamers. The question becomes, do you need to add things to that? And if so, what would need to be added in order for us to get to the place where we have sufficient votes, but doesn't get bombarded with its own weight of adding too many things on it? So if you ask for my opinion, I think what you're going to see is the addition of dreamers plus something that we already know Congress has debated. Congress has found bipartisan support on, right? So if you think the way we're thinking about it, it's got to be something that people have already touched, right? They've already considered. And so if you look at the last congressional session, you see that dreamers could be paired first with a farm worker bill, right? There was a farm workforce bill that took place in the House last session that had bipartisan support. You know, it was rare even last session, but it happened. It was an immigration bill. It had Republicans and Democrats on it, and it had outside groups on it. And it seemed to have a good balance of focusing on the agricultural workers, but the necessary pieces for the visa reforms, the necessary pieces for the workers themselves, and then for the compliance components. And so if you wanted, I think there's a world where you can see dreamers plus maybe that ag population. Another one was the essential healthcare workers, right? And this was a bill in the Senate last session from Senator Perdue in Georgia and Senator Durbin, again, Republican and Democrats coming together, talking about unused visas that could be allocated for doctors and nurses to help the country where we needed those individuals throughout the country, right? Particularly in the rural areas where we could have more doctors and nurses to deal with everything that was going on. So I think that that's the reality that gives us the best opportunity to get things on. It's dreamers plus something that we saw some sort of bipartisan support for in the last Congress. That's already showing that there's an appetite to get that done. On the 2021 question, you know, David, I'll defer more to you because I know Libre's got a really aggressive agenda, and that's great. And AFP's got an aggressive agenda. That's great because we know there's a lot of things that need to get fixed. But on immigration, I'll just share overall, we want to get something done. And if that something is big enough to create momentum to quickly do a second thing, then we'll be there to do the second thing, right? There's no cap on how much we can do in 1 year, but it's important that in this year, we start to try to see the movement on at least one of those things.
I'll remind folks also, David, that it was President Donald Trump who proposed citizenship for 2 million in the Dreamer community. And obviously it came with those other 2 pillars that I was talking about, 25 billion for the wall. And then of course, the drawdown of legal immigration that folks didn't want to touch. But what was important there is that there already is a willingness on the GOP side to listen to what Jorge was talking about, which is the DACA piece or the Dreamer piece that folks, I feel very confident can come together on. And to answer one of the other questions, I mean, I see folks like Collins and Murkowski and Paul and Cornyn and Thune and Portman coming together on something like that, and maybe even Rubio and Perdue and Tillis and on, where there could be real consensus on the issue of the Dreamer legislation, and then maybe some other topics that Jorge was talking about.
Well, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for your time. You guys are always great and knowledgeable about what's happening around the country. I want to invite everybody that's on the call tonight to pay attention to all of the great conversations that are being had by Tim and Daniel on media all across the country, and also in these type of events that we do, these informational sessions. One interesting thing about DACA is that 78% of Americans agree that recipients should be able to remain in America, right? And so that's a source of common ground, right? So a place that we can work on, right, and continue to build commonality there when it comes to immigration. Jorge talked about 2021, and I know it was one of the questions, and that's why I want to take that question on, because part of what we do, and a big part of what we do, is have conversations with communities about solutions. And what are the solutions that we can help drive? And in order to do that, we need you. We need each and every one of you to be a part of that conversation, whether it's at the local level, at the state level, or specifically on the national and federal level. One of the things that we do really well here at Americans for Prosperity and the LIBRE Initiative is organize people behind an idea so that we can propose solutions that affect people's everyday lives. And so part of my job as the executive director of LIBRE, and Daniel's job as the president of LIBRE, is to make sure that we're engaging you guys in a way that you feel like you are empowered to take action, right? And so I wanted to introduce at the very end here something that we're doing called Hablemos de Soluciones. Let's talk solutions. And basically what we want to do is we want to have ongoing conversations with local folks, with you all, with your community leaders, your church leaders, your school leaders, your legislative leaders, state representatives, to start talking through some of these solutions like immigration and how it affects your everyday life, how it affects your business, right? And then have larger conversations with experts like we're doing right now, right? And bring in some other folks. And the idea is to build momentum, is for us to start to get energized about the things and the policies that we can provide solutions for. And so I want to invite you all to be a part of that. We have a landing page that's on our website. I know that that's getting posted in the chat here, but we also have this other page, and we also have something called an I Volunteer. And that's it's a petition that you can sign and be a part of right now, tonight. We have one that's separately, specifically for DACA, and that will be sent to legislators. And we also have one just for immigration reform as a whole. That is a way tonight, right now, that you can take action. And part of what we do, and a big important part of what we do, is making sure that people can take part and can be a part of the process. And the way that we do that is by elevating our voices. So we'd like to invite you to that. Our first Hablemos de Soluciones events will start happening locally where you're from right now. It'll start happening probably right around the end of March is when the first will be coming up. And we'd love for you to participate on it and to be a part of that. So please remember, there's a few places where you can get information. First of all, our website, belibre.org. And then there's specifically a page at belibre.org/immigration-information session, which is specifically has all of the answers, our agendas on there. And the I Volunteer link is also there as well. So what I'd like for you all to do, since we all want to see change here, is to take action right now. So as soon as we hang up right now from this call, if you could take just 1 minute to go on and get involved in the I Volunteer side, get to our website, find out where you can be a part of these Hablemos de Soluciones, Let's Talk Solution events. We'd really appreciate to continue the conversation and also to continue action. So please look forward to the things that we're doing. We want to reach out to you, make sure that you're connected to what the possibilities are and to what and to how we all can elevate our voices to be successful in this area. So I want to thank everybody tonight for your time. We really appreciate it. We wish that we could meet in person, but this is the way we're doing it right now. And then it's actually leading to a lot of success. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And thank you to our panelists. You guys did an awesome job. We really appreciate you all. Have a great night.